Hi, everyone. My name is Emily, and I'll be co-hosting this panel with Giulia. And today we're going to be talking about emotion detection. And this is a really, really interesting topic that I'm super excited to dive into. And we have an awesome panel of experts. And I guess let's just start with a round of introductions. Phoebe, one one of the Phoebes. Do you want to go first?
I can, sure. My name is Phoebe Piercy. I am the program manager of the voice team, working on the voice technology at GridSpace. We make AI agents and voice analytics software. I'm more on the engineering side.
Craig, you want to go next? Or other Phoebe?
Go ahead, Phoebe. I'll follow you.
Oh, I think you're muted.
It does.
There you go.
Yeah, is it on?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So my name is Phoebe Ohayon. I'm head of design at Voice Branding, where we specialize in branded voice AI experiences, characters, design systems, to create expressive experiences and interactions. Basically giving their brands their own voice. So in such projects, we conduct a lot of research into how voices are perceived by users, utilizing acoustic analysis, pitch, intensity, speaking rate. So that's a bit also my perspective on this panel, bringing in more of the voice and acoustic analysis perspectives in terms of emotion detection and data, and share my experiences as a designer in creating conversational AI products and services with emotion detection as well.
Craig?
Oh, thanks, everyone. My name is Craig Tucker. I'm the creator and founder of Vern AI. It's a real-time emotion recognition system that's patented, and it's being used by tens of thousands of people worldwide in award-winning customer service and mental health applications. It's a multimodal emotion detection system. Relies primarily on language, but does incorporate audio and visual signals into a full analysis and understanding, and we're available through API or for on-prem. Just any way that you need to have empathy, we can insert ourselves in. So we've been doing this now for a number of years. I came out of academia at Michigan State University on their PhD program when I was researching sentiment analysis and emotion. So we bring some of an academic and scientific perspective to the topic at hand.
Sweet. Well, thank you all for being here. And yeah, I guess there's a lot to cover. So let's just dive in. Okay, so first question, just because I don't think people necessarily understand like what emotion detection is. So I was wondering if you can kind of explain from your perspective what it is. Go ahead.
Sure. Well, I guess I can kind of jump in. What we consider emotion detection is a process of like identifying, interpreting human emotions, like, well, for instance, we do anger, sadness, fear, love, and joy, based on like clues in language, the words we use, the voice tone, facial expressions, and body language. So there's a lot of signals that emotion detection can do, because as humans, we have a lot of signals that we pay attention to. So the software should actually replicate that ability of humans to truly be AI.
And I think there's a distinction as well between kind of traditional sentiment analysis versus kind of emotional analysis, emotion detection. In that sentiment, like I could say, oh, that was a terrible movie. And my emotion is quite upbeat, happy. That's what's coming across in my voice, in the audio signals, even though the sentiment of my phrase is potentially negative about the movie. And I think emotion detection, as opposed to sentiment, is a much bigger part of having a good human-to-human interaction communicatively, or another part of it.
Yeah, in my experience, context is definitely key in the whole process of emotion detection and determining the right categories and assigning the right labels for it. Yeah.
Very good. Yeah, something to point out as well is that the difference between like sentiment analysis and emotion recognition models too is that sentiment analysis oftentimes uses psychology models, and the problem with that is the psych models don't agree. You can ask it, and it will say that there's a standard model of 5 or 7, depending who you ask. There's some models that say there are 9 emotions, and there's even the most famous one, Plutchik's Wheel of Emotion, which is a continuum, and everything is diametrically opposed, which would be great, but that's not actually how the brain works. We've even seen papers in PNAS that have said that there's 27 or 40 different distinct salient emotions, which you don't really need to be a data scientist to know that they're probably introducing confounds. They have mislabeling things, and so what you end up getting from a sentiment tool, or from example from large language models, is you get soup. It takes all these models and theories and mixes them together and gives you what you think what you think you need to hear. But it isn't emotion. It's just basically a mix-up of all these models. Things like optimism or calmness are not emotions. They may be states, but this is what those systems will get you. You'll never also get the same answer twice, which becomes a big problem too. As a measurement tool can't be used if it doesn't get the same answer with the same input.
So I wanted to dig in a little bit to what you said about like the sentiment may be different than the emotion. I was wondering how you figure that out, like how you determine or what you go off of.
Yeah, I mean, for us, a lot of it actually just boils down to what a human would recognize, because at the end of the day, it's a model. A model is dependent on the data is dependent on the labeling process. And so if a human is able to identify a sentence as sounding happy, that can be through frequency, it can be through word choice, whatever at a human level, based on a prescriptive labeling process that is coherent and consistent. It kind of can be, tonal, prosodic. It can be the word choice. The thing that you're trying to then kind of almost prompt humans to identify is what the person is feeling underneath, what their underlying emotional state is, as opposed to what they are trying to necessarily, like what the sentiment of the sentence is. So I would say a lot of it just comes down to how you're defining your labeling process and your data that's going into the model, and then the things that you key off of are entirely based on what a human can recognize.
Yeah, and a good point about sentiment analysis too is that we've done a lot of discovery and a lot of research. We've talked to several folks in the enterprise level of Fortune 500 companies that run marketing departments and use sentiment analysis for anything from social media analysis and response to chatbots, virtual assistants, to analyzing copy. And the thing that they told us is that it's a black hole. Sentiment analysis is good, but it only gives you 20% of the total picture. Most of the stuff that we get is mixed emotions or neutral, because the way that the models work is they'll average out the positive and negative, basically anger and love in the same sentence and say, well, it's neutral, instead of giving you the actual emotions and where they're actually said sentence by sentence. So that becomes a big problem when industry and enterprise spends some cases over $1 million a year for analytic companies to provide sentiment analysis that ends up only using 20% of it, and then they have to hire analysts to analyze the analysis. So it's kind of crazy. So was a need for some kind of a different model out there, emotional model, and that's something that we've been creating, and I know that folks in the panel have been working with.
Anything else to add, Phoebe? Okay. So I was wondering how it's typically used in conversational AI experiences, and I guess what the primary use cases are, or like what you've seen it used the most for.
I can hop in with a quick response here. We primarily use it for NLG responses. A lot of our kind of use cases are based on either information collection, and we work with a lot of medical institutions where we're potentially talking to people who have just been discharged from hospital, or people who are perhaps older. And so we don't necessarily, the form that is being filled out, the information is being collected, is pretty prescribed by our users. And we do a lot of like hallucination management on that front. It's just, this is what the bot is achieving. It's task oriented. And then the emotion side of it comes into how that affects the NLG. That's configurable, but essentially if someone's like feeling upset or frustrated, making sure that the bot is responding in a way that they can then continue the conversation feels natural. NLG, sorry, natural language generation. So the the dialogue that is said as opposed to the kind of underlying conversation task being achieved. If that distinction makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think in my line of work, it's mostly used to create better experiences and to learn from the data that we get from those kind of models. Also to personalize experiences. So for example, for in-car use, multiple inputs are gathered, voice, facial, maybe posture, to personalize experiences in terms of suggesting maybe taking a break or from driving or that kind of stuff. So we really use it, or in my line of work, we use it to create better experiences and better services.
That's great, Phoebe. That's really good insight. We use this everywhere. Well, that's what we do. So there are 50 plus use cases for emotion recognition within computing, because computers can't understand human emotions. They need something to do that for them. And kind of illustrate a point too, is we're finding that using these with large language models is been incredible, because the large language models, kind of alluded to earlier, will guess at what the emotion is. But if you give them the right emotion, the intensity, and the situational context, they don't have to guess. Then it's basically like, hold my beer. And so these AI assistants actually act empathetic, understand the emotions directly, and we've had some great success with it with mental health applications, customer service applications. In one case, one of our users is Evermore.io, and they were in a number of different countries, and they had 8,000 of their users were surveyed, and 97% of them reported that they had less anxiety, less brain fog, and more motivation just using the application, primarily because it was able to understand their emotions correctly, accurately, track it over time, help them understand themselves. So it can go anywhere from the social media monitor to do something we call detect, direct, and quality check, which is detect the emotions, direct it down the right pathway according to the emotional context. And then obviously when we get hallucinations like Phoebe was mentioning earlier, we like to run the LLM responses back against Vern to make sure that we're getting the right emotion, because we know for fact that there is such a thing called an emotional contagion, that your agents, your bots can pass on these emotions from themselves to other people and basically infect them with a bad mood. This is something that academia has been trying to prove. We've been able to see it in data, so we're currently writing some papers on that itself. But it can be used everywhere. Empathy is a problem we all have. I started this off. I had so many misconceptions about it. When I started off in the research that kind of bore out. So it's everywhere, and we use it day to day. And sometimes we don't even realize how much of a part of our lives it really is.
And so, like, I'm curious to hear, because I hear a lot of use cases where it's like, oh yeah, like this way, then we can personalize like the response, or like it can be like more, yeah, like empathetic to what that emotion was. So should then the response usually be something like in tune with the emotion of the person, like matching it, or should it be like complementary? Is there like a generic rule, or is it like
No.
a case by case?
I would think it's case by case, Phoebe. I'm sorry, my mic's off, so I jumped in. I think it's case by case from what we see. I'll let you guys jump in.
Oh, so yeah, in my case, just talking from my experience, of course, it really depends on the context. Context is key in designing the responses for that. So yeah, sometimes you want to trigger like an apology response, sometimes extra help, sometimes you don't want to be too forgivable or too sorry because it's not on brand, so it really depends on what you're designing there.
We've also found, just like from the customer service use cases, it's actually not very helpful if the response is just I understand that you feel that way. That is quite often like one of the worst things you can do, is admit to noticing the emotion and not then responding to it effectively. We've kind of found that it's almost like once, if and this kind of gets into some of the, I think, later questions about if AI can ever like fully embody emotion as opposed to just like approximating and imitating it. But in conversations where someone is responding emotionally to you, quite often they are angry on your behalf. And that's when you feel seen, rather than I noticed that you are angry. So I think there's kind of a fine line between having a response that is appropriate and not just being like, yes, I can see that you are this, and I am not going to change how I respond or what I do in response to that. I think that's the worst of both worlds, really.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I would say, add to that as well, I think that if you respond back with empathy and act like you're a teammate, that you're on their team, they feel seen and heard, validated. And then you have, you're basically following great customer service rules, right? Where you're trying to, enlist the person to be a team member, to show that, they can trust you, that you're their inside person to get them what they're asking for, what they're looking for. So yeah, it's really situational, but that does help.
So I'm curious what actually you look at when you're analyzing these emotions. Are you do like the tone of voice? Do you analyze like different points within, like how fast they're speaking, how the pacing, timing, that kind of stuff?
From my perspective, we analyze a lot of things. We also analyze non-vocal or verbal cues. So let's say like, like those kinds of things. Those are quite hard to measure, but even analyzing those are really helpful for us to measure frustration, for example, or detect frustration in a user experience. But we also measure like pitch, intensity, and like the combination of measurements can tell us a lot of things in terms of like frustration or happiness or that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, sorry. One of us jumping in first. On our side, we don't measure each of those things separately. We do for a dashboard as far as like speed of talking goes, like call satisfaction at the end, but our emotion model actually runs on the kind of encoder layers of our speech recognition model. So in those layers are encoded in high dimensional space all of the information that comes from tone, prosody, speed, things said. Anything that's in that audio signal that's coming in is encoded somewhere in those hidden layers, and then that's what we essentially have another a separate and specialized kind of decoder head off of that does the emotion recognition. So then the hope is that we're not putting in our own expectations as to what features are going to be important and missing something as a result, and we're letting the encoder encode that, essentially.
As far as for what we do, we are mostly a language specific model, but we do audio and visual as well. And the reason is when I started out on this journey, I thought, well, like everybody else, it's the body language, or it's the tone of voice. Turned out, yeah, it's part of that, but it's not the majority of it. The majority of it is actually in the language, the words we use, the word choices, how we use them, where we use them, what context. And what we found is that we like to play a game with one another. So that's what we've patented, is that game that humans play between one another in their communication. So we're able to get above 80% accuracy on just the words alone, down to a 3-word sentence. The additional layers of abstraction, of logical abstraction, like audio and visual, help. And they either confirm or they contradict the words that are being said. So then that goes into some other type of decision-making processes that looks at the context, looks at the signals, and like we're saying, from how fast they're speaking, what the volume is, and then adds everything up together, kind of comes up with a composite score at the end of the analysis. So, and then it depends on things that we're deploying. So if it's, for instance, just a voice-only AI bot, well, then obviously we just have the words and we just have the audio. But if we have one of our AI avatars, which is photoreal 3D, can see you, can see your emotions, can see your environment, understands all of the multimodal emotional expressions, then it will combine all of them and use all of them to determine what the emotion is. And then, once it has the emotions, we have different ways and frameworks in which we have the bot accomplishing goals, mainly to make the person on the other end happy or less angry. But there are other things we can do with social engineering using emotions that can help accomplish goals, like getting them to add things to the shopping cart more often, identifying fear of missing out, identifying churn rates and burnout, within workers. And there's a lot of things we can do. And to kind of go back to the whole idea of the modals. There's an exercise that I do with students and folks, and then I go in and I speak with, and it really helps to kind of illustrate this point. What I do is I ask them to take a look around the room and to turn to the person next to them and ask them, if they, or tell the other person that they love them and they want to spend the rest of their life with them, but they can only use vocal clues, no words. And then watch them try to do that. And it's funny, they do a lot of clicks and everything else, and they try to, guttural noises. They sound like Tim Allen, for those that are old enough to remember Home Improvement. But then, I turn around and I ask them, okay, well, now do this, turn around to the other person, and I want you to tell them you're very sorry that their grandmother died and your most sincere condolences, but you're only going to be using body language and facial expressions. And then ask them to do that again. And it's funny to watch them happen. I mean, it really is comical to watch people try to accomplish this. And then I tell them to add the words, in both instances. And then there is no ambiguity. There is a complete clarity of what we understand, the emotions that we're trying to convey. And it turns out that we evolved to communicate emotions. We're finding that emotions are the lingua franca of communications, that they're one of the main reasons why we, as a naked ape, with no defense mechanisms, can conquer the earth, is because our ability to communicate not only the facts and observations, but also how we feel and how we relate to one another. One of the reasons why we conquered the earth. And so it kind of exponentially grew our mind space from just being one mind to a collective. And nothing can beat that.
Yeah, that's I mean, it's amazing how much we can communicate with just, with what we have. So I'm curious how you deal with emotion detection across different languages and cultures. Because I know for some people will say the same things, but it'll sound completely different. So how do you kind of detect that? How do you measure that? How do you even approach it?
Well, how we approach it is we're rooted in neuroscience, so it's not just linguistic sentiment. We're using basically Edmund Rolls' theory and model of emotions. He's one of the neuroscience pioneers. And so everybody has a brain. Every brain is pretty much the same way. So we communicate these incongruities we detect and how we relate to them to one another, independent of language. So it really doesn't matter what language it is. That's the medium that conveys these emotional states. But to date, we haven't found anybody that is that different with their brain anatomy in order to be able to say that that there would be other differences. Now, granted, there always is differences between one language and the other, and we account for that with something we call a personal frame. It's basically how you relate to the golden truth of the emotion, and that depends on your knowledge base, your experiences. A lot of that has to do with where you grew up, what culture you're in, and some specificity. So around the edges, yeah, that actually makes a huge difference. But that's something that can be accounted for, and it's still coding and sending and receiving the same emotional signals depending on language.
Sorry, this is actually a question for Craig. So in the input, if the input signals are distinct between languages, how are you then translating that into that same brain state?
Well, the brain states that we're looking for are pretty much the same, right? So we're looking for the we either get rewarded in our brain when we detect an incongruity or when we share that incongruity. So that incongruity then becomes and it's a binary system on and off in your brain, right? Euphoria and not euphoria. So it's how we relate to that incongruity depends on the emotion that we're going to feel. For instance, if it's a malignant incongruity, we're going to be angry about that. That's something that's not going to help us. It's going to go against our goals, and it's contrary to everything that we're trying to do. Conversely, love and joy is, and I don't mean to be non-romantic, but it is the absence of roadblocks. It is everything's aligning with your goals. And if you think about this from take a step back, you can see that, yeah, I mean, I pick the clothing I have because it fits my goals. The car that I drive, even the spouse that I marry, the person I'm involved with, all of those are about your goals. And so each culture has the same brain anatomy. They have the same incongruities. It's just there's slight differences in how they will communicate it to one another. So, angry sentences are in, English and Chinese and French and German. Words that, that mean mostly something, are usually pretty good to go with. You can always make adjustments around the edges and the fringes for that. But from what we're seeing is so far, it has been pretty easy to have that translated over. There are some cultures, obviously, that are more difficult than others. But, for the most part, we all have the same brain anatomy.
Anything else to add here?
Okay. I can add from our perspective of it being a case of from the voice in, again, just coming back to the data available. So not applying an emotion model trained on data in one language to a language that it was not trained for. Because you have not caught those nuances, you have not caught those cultural differences in the data set that you have labeled for that emotion. And again, also just making sure that it follows that when you're labeling that data set, it contains the cultural norms of that language and is labeled for that.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And Phoebe, just a point of clarification, Vern is not a machine learned or deep learned derived model. It's hand crafted and curated algorithm. So we don't actually train on any data. So that's one of the reasons why we can go from one culture to the next, is because we're not extrapolating all of the insights from a small data set in English to French, because that wouldn't apply, right?
That's a great clarification. I think I had missed that, but that's really cool. Yeah, thanks.
Phoebe, did you?
Yeah, I don't think I can add in. Yeah, in my line of work, we do dig a bit deeper into just like the basic emotions. So we're really looking for like very brand specific characters or traits that are not like really common in commercialized models in that sense. So we do see, when we do research, a lot of nuances in different acoustic patterns and combinations that relate or correlate to perceived emotions like professionalism, or different contour patterns in terms of like questions that's very different in many different languages we see. So but that's also a bit our work, to dive into really nuanced, very specific brand fit voices that have maybe a bit on the other kind of emotion spectrum to dig into.
I think there's an interesting question for us to unpack from the audience about when AI detects emotions. Does it concentrate on specific ones like happy, sad, and angry, or is it trained to recognize all possible emotions? And I feel like, Craig, you hinted maybe at this at the beginning, but I think it's a great one to get into if you have if everyone has anything to share.
Sure. Yeah. As far as we go, we detect anger, sadness, fear, love, and joy all at once on every sentence. So we get a good idea of all of the emotions that are being tried to communicate. And additionally, we not only do we check those 5 major emotions, but of each one of them, there are 20 sub emotives that we track as well. For instance, under anger, you would probably expect to see frustration, annoyance, threats, insults, dehumanizing language. Well, those are part of the model as well. So that we detect them all at once, and it's amazing to see how much we do actually communicate with mixed emotions. You can pick up a majority of an anger signal with a little bit of a fear signal. Well, that is a great clue if I'm working in human resources, mental health, doing therapy, or heck, even a chat bot that I want to improve or impress, the user. Wow, you picked up on that subtle tone. Yes, I am actually afraid, not just angry. So those types of things really do help the AI relate to the person and helps them feel seen and validated.
Yeah, to kind of add to that, just categorical is the ability to have different categorical emotions next to each other is, I think, hugely important, rather than just like a valence number on a scale. We report a valence for like customer satisfaction for our voice analytics platform, so that customers can see if the call kind of went well and they can filter on that and get analytics for it. But the actual voice agent only uses our categorical stuff for that reason. And also, yeah, the narrowing down of what the emotions are that you're using, I think we were definitely looking at narrowing it down based on what is actionable in a communication channel for a conversation. So what humans use as communicative emotions. So things like frustration, anger, fear, surprise, pleasant. And again, 80% of the time, no one's actually injecting any of these. Like neutral is the predominant emotion in conversation, and being able to also just have that as like, it's not just generating, oh, there must be an emotion at every sentence, is another kind of important aspect. And seeing the change where it goes from neutral to an emotion is then the key sentence to be like, okay, now something happened, something changed.
You maybe bring up a great point, Phoebe, is you don't want to be a hammer that sees everything as a nail, right? That's one of the things that we found with using those ML and DL derived models, is it would literally label things that it thought were and weren't. So we had to discard that, go with a hand created model. So yeah, we see that a lot. Absolutely, that's a great point.
Phoebe, did you also have anything to add?
No, I think most of the things are quite covered. Yeah. What I see in my day-to-day work is more broad systems or emotion detection systems in terms of like what they can detect. Yeah. Happy, sad, angry, fear, neutral. And I think if you want to look into more advanced models, it's usually, or you look into more models that can detect specific emotions. Those, in my experiences, are mostly customized or trained specifically for the use case.
Yeah, I would agree. They're very niche oriented. So you'll get like a legal, it will be just only trained on legal, or it's very hard to find a generalist model for sure.
Yeah.
If they're actually detecting the right emotions.
We have another interesting question in the chat, I think. Where do you draw the line between empathy and understanding versus manipulation and control when it comes to an agent being able to recognize emotion and acting according to it?
That's a great question. Thank you, Gunnar. So for us, we use the empathy and understanding as like, that's how we filter our response and tailor the response. But the actual action of the actual task oriented system underneath is not changing what the what the desired outcome of the conversation is. So the conversation is on rails. We have a mechanical dialogue system, and we outsource to LLMs for parts of that, for natural language understanding, for the generation. We have a transcription, but because the core of it is a mechanical state system, we're not going, like, the course and direction and purpose of the conversation is not going to change based on the emotion detection, simply how she phrases her responses. And that's how we kind of draw that line. I think allowing the conversation to completely be off-roaded by an emotion detection algorithm is potentially how that turns into manipulation.
Yeah, I agree. There's a fine line in designing those reactions. It depends a bit on the use case, of course. So if it's like a therapy-based app, then a bit more empathy is maybe expected from a user, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're just like calling for your bank account or whatsoever, I don't think a very empathetic response is like the way to go. So I think for every design team looking for interpreting those results and what to do with those results, you have to really think, what is the user expecting? What does it need in that kind of situation? And go from there, what you think is best. And also based on previous design experiences as well. Yeah, I think that's the best way to go always.
This is actually a really good question. I think that the line between empathy and understanding versus manipulation is really on an individual basis, because human beings do the same thing, right? Chatbots generally are there to help you accomplish goals and make you a happy customer. The goal is depending on what the chatbot is used for. If it's there to be a therapist, and it's going to listen to you, it's going to empathize, it's going to ask follow-up questions, going to adhere to behavioral frameworks, theories, and so it's psychology in order to accomplish its goals. So you can manipulate it, and it is possible. We actually do have a demonstration of that on one of the websites that I will send out to the group, where you can go and talk to an AI who is not there to make you happy. She's there to make you angry, right? And so it is actually very possible to manipulate and control people's emotions and to engineer systems and outcomes that may not be that great. They may be maladaptive. So the ability for this technology is there. There are folks in different countries and work for certain types of sectors, more violent sectors, that are definitely interested in this technology because of that ability. Now, it really is inherent on the user. It is inherent on the provider, and it is inherent on the whoever's supervising it to ensure that that does not happen. I mean, generally, we're not trying to reach outcomes that are going to make somebody upset or going to harm them in any way. In fact, we're quite the opposite. The use cases and outcomes we're trying to accomplish are things that they are trying to accomplish, but we're maybe doing it in a creative way, or encouraging the person to stay on the topic or stay on maybe something specifically hard for them to talk about. We may need the AI to push through on that. So, there may be some instances where framework of the overall pathway and goal for the conversation is very important. And so, yes, you do have to manipulate in certain ways, the same way that a human would, the same way that a customer service rep would, or a therapist would. But generally, across the board, our goals are aligned with the use case for the bot. And as long as they're in responsible hands, they should act responsibly.
Yeah, and I was wondering, because we're talking about ethics, and so often ethics also then comes down also to some aspect related to like laws and regulations. If there's like any specific way that you're handling emotion detection as relates to that. I'm particularly mindful of EU AI Act, which we know is top of mind, especially here in Europe, but I guess also elsewhere. Yeah, do you have anything on this?
Yeah, that's a great one. If you don't mind, I'll jump in. We've actually engaged with the UK and the United States' teams that we're looking at this regulation, that we're writing it, and some of the work groups. We've had some comments, had several conversations with them. Tried and attempted to do the same thing with the EU. They unfortunately didn't listen. Our big point is that emotions evolved because humans need them, and we evolved the ability to share and understand emotions amongst itself. To have a system that's precluded from doing so is really is removing the ability of human beings from the AI space. And so it makes not only no sense from a commercial standpoint, but from an ethical standpoint, it wouldn't be ethical to have these systems developed in different places, which may not carry the same values as we do. So the UK and the US listened, which is great. And as far as our regulations, we're airtight. We created our system with, knowing that HIPAA, COPRA, GDPR, the EU Act, all of these things were threats. And so Vern is stateless, doesn't store anything, just stores on the client's already compliant servers. Everything there is completely gone within a second, so it's almost virtually impossible to intercept those signals. We'll also do things like scrubbing out and anonymizing rather, and encrypting, so that does help quite a bit with the regulation space.
Yeah, our approach has always been staying compliant within our industries. Medical and bank are our main industries, so HIPAA PCI is incredibly important to us. Redaction, but as far as like the EU, like the ethics side of the EU AI Act, the majority as well is transparency, is having bots. Like, does your bot identify as a bot when it first comes on the phone? Our general recommendation to our customers is that it should immediately be like, "Hi, I'm a virtual agent." And also just like in the product itself, when businesses are using it, they can turn off the emotion side of things. They can decide as to what level of chattiness, verbosity they're using. So transparency is, again, the EU laws are different from the US ones, but even in the EU AI Act, it's still the heavy emphasis is on be transparent.
Yeah, I totally agree. We see a lot of clients using maybe emotion detection models, and here in the EU, there's always we have to tell that we are using that or that we're using their data, et cetera, et cetera. So there's also like a lot of trust evolved in just like being transparent upfront. Some cultures that is that is not a big deal of like that transparency. I know in some countries there are already cars with just like cameras and just like recording everything from passengers and drivers. That's like a totally different ballgame that we have here. So it's very different between all the countries and continents there in how to deal and protect that sensitive data. Definitely.
From a design perspective, how does that factor into like how you design the experience, or does it?
It does. We as like a team don't try to misuse the data. So sometimes you have like also teams like pushing a bit maybe for like manipulation or that kind of stuff. So we always try to be a bit ethical and not push in that direction. And it's also for us, it's really important if the user knows. So if there is like some kind of consent already, and the user is aware of his face is being recorded or his voice is being recorded, then it's also okay for us to use a bit more of that data and design appropriate reactions and experiences and interactions. But if it doesn't know, we are a bit like this in terms of it doesn't feel really ethical for us to use that data and design on that.
Of course, yeah. Craig?
Oh, I just would agree. I think those are very, very good use practices. Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess I'm curious, do you think AI will ever reach a point where it can genuinely understand emotions? Or will it kind of always depend on the models it's being trained on, or what it's learning from people?
That's an excellent question, and I think that it already is. It already understands emotions, but it can't feel emotions. It doesn't. It lacks the biochemical, infrastructure basically to be able to feel. But it can understand emotions, understand what they are as far as in human context. So it understands the emotions. It just doesn't always know what to do with them. I think that's one of the guides and one of the reasons why folks hire the Phoebes, because they do great work to build experiences where people will feel and akin to them, that they'll actually understand them, and they'll make them feel seen and validated.
I think my answer will be a bit more political correct. In my opinion, it will always be, or will remain, a bit like a prediction model in the end. Yeah, but yeah, predicting human emotions and reactions, but really, yeah, feeling and really like understanding from a human kind of cognitive level perspective. No.
Yeah, my take would be anything that, kind of what Phoebe was saying, anything that is trained or tuned by a human to imitate what we are doing and how we are interacting is never going to be viewed as anything other than an imitation system. And people are never like, I think the real test comes when you're interacting with these things. Are you treating them as an equal partner in the conversation in the way that you would a human? And I don't see that happening right now. I don't feel it when I interact with these systems. I feel like I am the more sentient, important person in the interaction when I'm interacting with an AI still. And until I feel like the other thing I'm interacting with has an equal emotional importance, then I don't think we have reached that. And I don't think we will again when we are literally when we are training these to be imitation models. I think we will get responses from humans as if they are. We even saw that in Eliza back in back in the day when there wasn't. It was just responding, and how do you feel about that? And people still respond as if they are seen, they are heard, but they are still the important ones in the conversation. If there is a day when an AI develops its own way of responding emotionally that maybe bears even no resemblance to a human's, then that would be a different matter. As long as it's imitating humans, it's just an imitation, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think it will always be like a tool for us to build better experience, even like from my perspective, and it won't like replace any like tasks or services that we do. It always is like a supportive tool. And I think also in other use cases, if you're a therapist and you have an AI or an emotion detection tool running with your session, it will be a tool to help maybe fill in the gaps that they missed, or be like a suggestive add-on, but it will never replace like their full expertise on how to interpret emotions from a human perspective.
And that's a good point. Is we're all humans. We all have emotions, and so for better or worse, we're all consider ourselves experts in emotions, whether we are or not. So as far as like whether the AI can understand that or not, that's really kind of a subjective thing. And really to need to understand is accurately detect and measure, the phenomena over time consistently. So we feel we have, reached that point where the AI can understand emotions once we detect it. And then from there, it does know very well what you can do, with those emotions. Once you take that ambiguity out, the LLMs or other AI that you have doesn't have to guess, then it knows what to do with the emotions in the context. That's the big problem was just getting that first understanding, is allowing the computer to be a receiver when listen to the sender and be able to pick up the signals that are being sent over. And it turns out it's not as much of a qualitative analysis as it really is a lot more of a quantitative analysis than we'd think.
One other point to make actually as well is that we're seeing that people are changing how they're interacting with AI. Like we're assuming that people are going to use the same emotional outputs, the same level of things with a human as they do with a voice system, but they're not. They're changing that because they're getting used to ChatGPT. They're getting used to these systems, and the fact that you can interact with them differently and you can get the response that you want. So we're using them as tools, and we're changing our voices based on that.
100%. Yep.
Just to build off of that, I was wondering like how you measure success, and like because there's so many different emotions, because they're always evolving. How do you know like when an interaction has been successful and you've kind of understood, or like, yeah, understood what people are trying to communicate?
Sure. Well, for us, it's pretty easy. If they have the maladaptive emotions, the negative ones, if they go down over the term of the call, then they would consider it to be successful, much like a CSAT score would be, right? Customer satisfaction score. But we found it using Vern, we can find something that's blowing everybody's CSAT scores up. Is that, at the end, we have this cultural phenomena of saying, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Have a nice day. 3 sentences, which are great. And they really peg high on the love and joy. And so that is taken as an average with the rest of the utterances in the sentence throws it off. So you'll get something that was maybe very angry. I'm not happy. I wasn't really happy to see you, but culturally, I feel like I'm obligated to end a call like this. So you're going to get a neutral when in reality, it was very negative, but you had this little sign off that threw everything off. So yeah, it's quite interesting.
Anyone else?
Yeah, we see a difference as well between like measuring success of the model as a unit, its ability to detect an utterance level or a conversation level emotion, and what is unacceptable. So especially when you have these categories that have overlap. So 2 of ours would be confusion and frustration. Those have 2 pretty different kind of conversational uses. Confusion, you're asking for clarity. Frustration, you're asking for help or some kind of resolution. So we kind of define that as what would a human have accepted as that is the emotion in terms of continuing the conversation, rather than what is the like absolute emotion in that utterance. But then, as kind of Craig was talking about, that is a completely different metric to, was the conversation successful? Did the person get to the end of the conversation and feel like they were listened to, understood, like they had a good experience? And I think increasingly there are being kind of analytic AI tools to be able to kind of go through a conversation and pull out those kind of those aspects. But I think it's one of the hardest problems actually in emotion detection, is that success ratio, is that success metric. Right, Craig?
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. It is very hard because it really depends on the context. What is the use case and what are the goals for this particular instance? If I'm a chatbot on a fintech website, maybe my success is that, we have less angry calls and more completions of what the user's intent was. So like something like that, right? And it really depends on the use case, and it's different from like customer service into mental health, right? We have mental health deployments where we consider success if somebody can get a referral to a human being, right? If the bot can actually catch the crisis, can triage them, and can get them to the right appropriate help in time. And then that's one of the ways we can score it. And so it really depends on the context itself. But in the end, why are you contacting somebody in the beginning is because you have limited knowledge and you're asking for somebody else to fill the gaps for you. Right. And what comes with that? Well, you get, obviously fear because there's doubt. You don't know. You get angry because you don't have the answers and somebody else does. That usually creates an imbalance and creates the what we call anger, to be unfairness. So yeah, it's really one of those things where it just depends on the on the case. We've been working on and experimenting with new metrics. Like for instance, we can find when customer service reps or chatbots that are really good at diffusing anger over time, right? We can track those with using Vern, find out which ones are best, do A/B testing, so on and so forth. Or, humans, right? We can track customer service representatives and find out who is the best at diffusing angry people, who's the best at making people happy. And so some of these new metrics and goals are more human related as far as like KPIs, and are also brand new. So it really depends case by case basis.
Phoebe, from a design perspective, like, do you do manual review? Do you have like automated review of like the emotions, or I guess how do you approach measurement?
It depends a bit from which angle. So if we measure emotions from a brand voice perspective, we do it manually, and we do a lot of like quantitative research, qualitative research, A/B testing, et cetera. But if we have to measure success in terms of what the interactions, the newly based interactions based on emotion detection do on the overall experiences, then it's user satisfaction, KPIs. Depends a bit on the context, what Greg said, what kind of success you want to measure for the use case. So we have a bit two different routes there.
And Phoebe P and Craig, do you also use like a mix of automated and human analysis, or do you mostly use automated?
I'm the opposite. We mostly use human.
Oh, okay.
We're being a hand-created model. We work with Dr. Brenna Watson, who's a content analysis expert, wrote the book on it. And so we actually use humans to verify it. We use a consortium called WSSA. WASA, I think, is their more colloquial term, that do study on all these things about emotions. So we compare ourselves to them frequently. And then nothing's better than the sniff test. So everything we have, that we do is for clients is transcribed with the emotions there, so they can go and verify. They can see, if it says they're angry, they'll read it and know right away, yes, it was right, or no, it was not. So usually flagging things that are out of the ordinary is usually the best case automatically, and then having the human come in and review. That is really, like I said before, we all have emotions. We're all somewhat experts in them. So really, when it comes down to it, any ambiguity is really best left to the human being. I still, doing what we do, I still would leave it to the human being to make that decision.
I love
That's
to hear
why
that.
we pass them off to. Mental health. I can't make a diagnosis. I can tell you they're angry, and how this fits into your CBT framework. What type of signals we're seeing and what type of red flags we're seeing, and I can hand that off to a practitioner that then can say, okay, excellent. I don't have to do any of the pre-screening. I don't have to do the questionnaire. I can get right into it, and I know what the problem is, and that helps out tremendously. So, from our standpoint, that's how we do it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, on our side, we do a mixture. Our other product other than voice AI is voice analytics, and we actually started off in macro analytics of customer service care centers, and it's still one of our major products. So we use a lot of kind of the satisfaction, we call it GSAT because grid space, our GSAT scores on those conversations for kind of more macro analytics, and then a mixture of auto QA. But again, as Craig was saying, nothing beats the human test. And we have very regular, let's just look at some of the calls. Let's see how she's handling these situations. We do internal A/B testing, and then when a bot is deployed, we monitor it. We look at some of the conversations. We make sure that it's interacting how we want it to, and whether it's handling sensitive situations well. And also whether it's also knowing when to hang up, like knowing when to be like, okay, you didn't want to be, because we do a mixture of inbound and kind of outbound calls that the success ratio is different for, right? That could just be oh, hi, I already talked to a human being. I'm good. And the bot can be like, okay, great, bye. So nothing can quite capture that, like just like kind of looking at the cause, looking at what you are working on, seeing the impact that you are having on real people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we're coming up on time, so just I wanted to throw, I guess, any last thoughts, any advice for people kind of getting into emotion detection or hoping to use it at some point?
Try, experiment, play around. I mean, that's really the best thing I can say to anybody that gets into this, is really understand, what's capable, and then the whole world of possibilities will open up for you. But really playing around, not being afraid to take chances, not being afraid to test out, make experiments, and then get feedback. And this is the best way, I would say, in order to get started with some kind of an emotion recognition or motion detection system.
Anyone else?
I'd say applying that across the board as well. If you're afraid of a technology and you haven't tried it out and you haven't like experimented with it, then do that before you're afraid of it, because there are limitations on all of these things. And the companies that are making them have a following guidelines. There are like guardrails. Being able to be aware of what you're interacting with and how you're interacting with it and how it's using your input is the best way to demystify and kind of explore any technology.
Yeah, I think everything's quite covered, but yeah, if you're a team and deciding to implement the technology, be really aware of the rules and regulations, be ethical about using the technology. I would stress that a lot. And yeah, also be aware, if you are like a team designing for like globally for different languages and cultures, be really aware that maybe one model cannot apply to every culture and language that you have to design for. So yeah, but otherwise experiment, see what the results give you, see what you can do with it, experiment with the team, look what you can use, and yeah, improve services and products.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for being here. This was fantastic. I learned so much. And I have a million follow-up questions, but yeah, and I know there were some other questions in the chat that I think we covered earlier in the conversation. So yeah, if there's anything else, I might tag you. But yeah, thank you all for your time. And yeah, we have one more panel of the season coming up in July. So stay tuned. And yeah, thank you for tuning in.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you
you so much.
Thanks.